This is the Get Healthy 360 podcast, where we discuss topics related to your physical, mental, psychological, and spiritual health. Your host is Dr. Chris Ferguson, board certified in anesthesiology and pain management. This podcast is for informational purposes only, and you should consult your primary healthcare provider before making any decisions related to your health. And here's your host, Dr. Chris Ferguson. Oh, one more thing before we start. If you like this episode, please consider rating us 5 stars. We would really appreciate it. Thanks very much.
Today we have with us Kathy Bowman. She is the owner of 21 Farms. She's also a nurse, and what she's going to talk about is how she got into raising cows. She's going to talk about the different types of cows, how raising animals and livestock can be very beneficial to educating kids. As a side note, and as a teaser, her kids were actually able to pay their way through college, raising cows and showing them. And then we're also going to talk about cow shows, fancy cow shows, and I think of them as cow pageants. So Kathy, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for the invitation.
So how did you're busy, you work as a nurse manager, how did you get into high-end cow raising?
Well, my husband works for a Farm Bureau cooperative, and at the time his job allowed him to go from farm to farm. He met a lot of different people, dairy farmers, those who were doing crop farming only, and beef farmers. So he felt that he really wanted to raise some beef. So he started out with just a few animals and just started collecting them and growing to the point where we are now. It's changed so dramatically since we bought that very first animal to where we are at this point.
So neither of you grew up really knowing anything about livestock.
I grew up in Chicago, and my only introduction to animals was at Lincoln Park Zoo. That's where I saw my first dairy cow being milked. It wasn't until I had moved to Wisconsin in 8th grade that I had any idea the amount of time and effort that goes into raising animals, or even how vast agriculture is. And he didn't either. He was in Milwaukee until his family moved back to White Lake. So neither one of us really had any type of farming in our background. I think his grandparents were dairy farmers, but even that was, he never worked on it or anything. He just thought this would be a fun thing to do.
I think if many husbands came home and told their wives, or how about we raise cows, I think a common response would be, all right, that's going to be your hobby, not mine. So how did you decide to go along with this cow raising?
It was his dream. This was something he wanted to do. He wanted our boys to be involved in it. I'm an all-in kind of girl, so if he saw it, I wanted to make that happen, and the more involved we got into it, the more exciting it became. It just has been phenomenal, and our boys have grown up around the animals, and then I have a multitude of sisters and nieces and nephews, and each of them are involved. So if it's time for us to separate animals or removing them from one pasture to the next, my whole family's there, his brother is there, so we're doing it all together.
And how many cows do you have right now?
Right now we have 30 cows and then just as many calves.
And how did you learn about cows going from zero all the way up to this microfarm that you have now?
Well, I did as much research as I possibly could, whether it was reading articles online, picking the brains of other people that we would meet, just watching. We'd go to some of these larger farms and just kind of see what they're using for handling facilities, how they're moving their animals, looking at their lineage, growth rates, different types of feeding programs, how they're growing their hay, everything that we could get our hands on. We tried, did, perfected, whatever worked for us.
And what was it like, that first cow that you bought?
Oh, goodness. Well, for one, she was super noisy. She would not stop mooing. Every time you came there, she was just very noisy. But for me, it was more pet-like. Like I treated it like I would if we would have bought a new dog. My husband was a little different. His view on it was, this is a business. She came where she was already bred. So that first calf went pretty easy. But as we grew, sometimes you had your challenges. You had calves that were maybe not as active as you wanted, and you had to do a lot more stimuli on them. Well, my first challenging one, we had bought a cow, and she ended up having a calf in the middle of winter. It was very unexpected. We had gone out, and she was just laying there. We did not know what we were going to do. So we picked her up, stuck her in the back seat of our truck, drove her to our house, put her in a heated room, warmed her up, ended up feeding her, and that went on for about 3 days. And so because she had been away from her mom really didn't take her back. So she ended up living in our barn, and she thought she was my child. So she would follow me around everywhere I went. She's now 9 years old, out in our field, and probably one of my favorite cows.
So she's clearly not becoming a beef cow.
She's not. She's my big pet.
She's your cow pet.
Yes, and she's had 5 calves of all different varieties as far as coloring, and she's had 2 bull calves, and the rest have been heifers. So she's been a really good cow producer for us.
So do you want to talk about what it's like raising kids and what they got out of raising cattle?
So our first, when we first started, after we had a few animals, my husband said, well, why don't we join our kids back into 4-H and they can show animals there?
So what is 4-H for those who don't know?
So 4-H is a program designed for children. You start out around 5 years old, and then it goes all the way through 1 year out of high school. There's so many life lessons. It's a nationally recognized program who really they're teaching leadership, mainly speaking skills. From our aspect, it's the piece about raising an animal and truly a product. You're raising an animal for sale, where someone is going to purchase that animal and it's going to provide them food. So for us, signed our kids up for 4-H, and my sisters had been involved in 4-H when we were younger, but they showed horses, and you do crafts and you have speaking events. So with going to the market animal side was a little different for us. So we had that first animal, and you're raising it ultimately to show. They do show it, and the judge comes in and judges the animal for the qualities that they expect it to have, whether it's the size of their loin, are they structurally sound? What do they expect to see once it's processed? What's that meat going to look like? And then on that end, after it is processed, another judge comes in and looks at the quality of that meat, and then you're judged on that as well.
So these are very important, and I think it sounds like serious lessons the kids are learning, because the health of this animal really depends on them.
Mm-hmm.
And how is it when the kids raise these animals and then sell them to become food?
Well, they have the animals long term. So when we're going to raise an animal for the fair, which is end of July every year, the animal is coming into the barn September, October. So it's a long-term project. And in order for them to effectively show that animal, you really need to build that relationship. So they're spending a lot of time. My sons were out there every morning before school feeding them, cleaning up after them, making sure they have water and hay, and then they come back in the evening. And because when we get into the cow pageant part, as you like to call it, there's a lot of work that they do on the animal. It's cleaning them out every day, could be rinsing them during the summer to keep them cool. So it's a pretty much a pure dedication on their part to this animal. So for them, there's a lot of responsibility involved in that, and they do build a relationship. But one of the things that we've always said to whether it be my sons or my niece or nephews is no matter what, this animal was going to be someone's dinner. No matter what, that was going to be its purpose. Just by, how, if it was born a male and it's going to be a steer, it's going to be someone's dinner. But there's not one single person that was going to love that animal more than they did. They are going to be kept cool in the summer. They're going to get baths every day. They're going to be loved on. No one will love them as much as you. So although their life was short, it truly couldn't have been any better.
So I've spoken to other chefs about this, about the quality of the meat that you're eating really matters. If an animal is not fed well, or if it's just chronically stressed, that will show in the meat. And if animals are just given too much antibiotics, that actually gets passed on to whoever is actually eating it.
Mm-hmm.
So do you want to comment on a little bit more specifics on how you care for these animals for those that are interested, what kind of diet they eat, and then your thoughts on, say, antibiotics, hormones, etc.
So for our animals, the animals that we raise out in the field, our herd of the 25, because for us, there's a difference between how the show animals are kept versus those that are more in our herd. So the ones out in the herd, they do receive vaccines, and that's really just for their health. Keeps them free of disease. They're prone to respiratory illnesses, especially with the extreme temperature changes in Wisconsin. So they do that. We very rarely would have to give anyone out in the field antibiotic. I mean, we just wouldn't. And then we do feed, they get grass. They're mainly grass fed. So this is hay that we've raised. My husband spends his summers baling. Then they do receive some silage on corn that we also raised. We try to ensure that our feeding program matches the conditions in which we expect. So at the times they're going to receive more energy during those colder months in Wisconsin to ensure that they have an adequate body condition to sustain the calf that they're carrying. So they will calf in the spring. So we do ensure that everything that they're getting, we're a part of that process. They aren't under no stress. We try to keep them pretty well stress-free. We move them from a couple of different pastures throughout the year, just based on spring, summer, winter, fall. So right now with the winter, they're right back at our house, and making sure that they have clean water. We have almost like a cow water fountain, so the water bubbles up as they're drinking it. No standing water at all. And then during the summer, they're on grass as well.
Any comments on pesticide use for the corn that you're raising?
You're going to see pesticides use in corn in general just because of the corn being prone to disease. I can't really comment on what my husband exactly uses or what that process is, but I will tell you that he is not going to do anything that would be unsafe to the animals.
So my impression then from what you're telling me is the cows are out in the pasture, they're walking around, they're eating corn that you're growing, grass. Because I think a lot of people are not aware, how are commercially raised cows raised?
A lot of times when you're seeing large feedlots, the animals will all be in this feedlot. It tends to be not a lot of grazing going on, and their whole meal is fed along a big line that they can pull into, like a bunk, things like that. We try to keep them out on as much pasture as possible, whether it be we have a 40-acre piece, a 20-acre piece, and then the 20 plus that are by our house. So we want them to be able to go out, move around, lay in the shade if that's what they want to do.
From what I gather, the commercially raised cows, they're just in a large, factory-like setting in this small little area.
I think what you're seeing processed more so commercially, like in a store, that tends to be what you do see. You're seeing more, it's a commercial production. These are large feedlots who need to process animals quickly to get out to, supply that to grocery stores. There is definitely something said of buying from local farmers in that aspect. I mean, you know exactly where your meat has been.
And there's another podcast where the guest talked about how it's also the stress hormones that the animals are under that gets passed on to you when you're eating it, which may not necessarily be good for you as well. It's not just the antibiotics or other things. It's actually just the physical stress those animals are under versus roaming around in a pasture drinking from a fountain.
Yeah, I have no scientific proof of this whatsoever, but I think of myself, if I'm under stress, I'm not feeling well, I could have high blood pressure, my heart could be beating faster, my body is worn. And when we know that, that if we have patients who are under stress, they're not as healthy as they could be. And so with the animals, we definitely we notice. I mean, if I look at the quality of meat of what I'm processing coming to my house, it tastes different. It just is different. You don't see a lot of that. And I know when we go on through 4-H and gone through the judging process of when they're looking at like the show pigs, they will tell you this pig has been under stress, the meat is discolored, or there's something that they're seeing in that processing piece that they know that it was under stress prior to that.
And people I know who say hunt, they will make the same comment about deer meat as well. If they've shot a deer and it's ran for a while before they get it, that meat will be different than quick, efficient kill of that animal. So do you want to talk about different types of cows? Because the only two types of cows I know about are, there's the Angus beef, and then there's the Wagyu and Kobe beef. If you want to educate me and everyone else about the different types of beef.
So Angus you'll see mainly throughout. They've done an excellent job marketing that. It's a delicious meat product. So Angus, those will mainly be all black, and that's what people will see. That must be an Angus or an Angus influence. There's Simmental, which is also another breed. They'll be all black or they could be red. And each, you can do research on any one of those breeds, and each of them bring a different quality to the meat. And if you speak to one of those producers of that type of animal, they will be happy to say, this is what you're going to get. So you have Angus, Simmental, Hereford, Shorthorn, and then you'll see people who do a lot of crossbreeding as well to get those different qualities. For us, we will use mainly Angus influenced. Our bull is a purebred Angus, but then you'll see like a Maine. That'll be a more maternal animal. Sometimes you'll choose a Hereford because they're a good milk producer, so they're going to grow that calf a little quicker than you may see. Angus calves tend to be a little smaller, so some producers will think, all right, it's going to take me a little bit more energy, a little bit more product to raise that calf, so I will influence with another breed because it'll grow faster.
If you can explain the difference between, say, Wagyu and Kobe beef, and then what your thoughts are on each of those.
I really have not done any extensive research on either one of those. I've tasted them. I can't say that I liked it. I'll be honest, I prefer that Angus, or at least that style of meat that's similar to that. The flavoring for me that's what I prefer.
I think there really is a large difference between, and if anyone hasn't tried it, I'd really encourage you to try a cow from a boutique farm and then compare that with commercial cut. And the taste is very, very different.
We get that a lot. Honestly, a lot of people who end up buying ground beef from us. I mean, you're thinking ground beef is ground beef, but that's one of the things that I will have the most requests for is ground beef. We are making ground beef tacos and you're frying it, you're not seeing that excess amount of fat. So when you have to drain that off, you just don't see that. We don't have that at all. We're not draining anything. And the taste and the flavor is just so distinct. I don't know that I could go back to purchasing ground beef in the store.
In my experience, the microfarms, because they do such a better job taking care of their cows, and the nutrition that the cow is getting is really more natural. It's pasture, not a feedlot. The meat is beefier in like a really good way. Like it's a rich, meaty, like
even the
food.
Coloring. I mean,
and the coloring is
color
different.
Is completely different.
Versus the commercial beef, it's more pale and doesn't really have much flavor. So do you also want to talk now about different cuts of beef?
It's so interesting to me to see the different cuts of meat. Going from someone who, before we started doing this, I really had limited knowledge of that. What's the difference between a chuck steak and a ribeye? Or if I'm going with ground beef and the percentage of fat and this, that it just wasn't there. So now I feel sometimes like I'm a steak snob. I really am careful about what cut that I want. My husband prefers the ribeye. For him, that's the end all get all. He loves the texture of that. It has to be exactly medium. Loves that flavoring. And we'll go to different restaurants and that's his go-to. Personally, I like a filet. Making a tenderloin is a lot of fun. Making sure you're not overcooking it. That's the key piece. I think that once you start going to that medium well done, it really does change the texture of that meat and the flavoring. Medium's kind of that go-to piece for that.
Do you want to comment on how would you prepare different cuts of meat? Because at least for me, it's confusing. You go to the store and you see sirloin or like porterhouse or chuck roast or whatever.
So your tendencies for roasts those are things that you may want to do like some slow cooking on specifically. And depending on the age of the animal is going to make a difference. The younger the animal, the more tender the meat's going to be. So even with the animals that we're raising, the roasts you could probably get by with just a couple hours cooking. You'll have like round steak tends to take a little bit. That's more of a tougher cut.
So what is a round steak?
So you'll see round steaks are like a beef stew meat. And really, depending on where that cut lies on the animal can affect that. If it's a muscle that they're using more frequently, then you'll see that meat to be a little bit tougher, and that may be where they get their ground beef from. Instead of cutting it into some type of steak or a piece of meat that you're going to grill or something like that, you'll ground it because it's a more overused muscle.
Okay. And then I didn't really know this existed. Do you want to talk about cow pageants? But this cow showing is a huge deal, and you've won these cow pageant things. So you can educate me because I don't know anything about them or how they work.
Well, I love your term cow pageant. Like I've used that now after you use that as a descriptor, because I feel like it really does probably encompass. I don't know if anyone else in the industry would be as appreciative as I am, but it really is a good descriptor of what's going on. So we started out at our county fair, and there was some showing there, and my kids had success. They've won grand champion where they were chosen like, this is the ideal animal. This is here out of this group of animals. This one's ideal. That's how the judge decides.
So do you want to talk about how you prep this cow to be shown?
Sure. So when we tend to keep them, we want to grow hair on them, which is pretty easy during the winter months, because their hair is as a protector, keeps them warm. So part of that is you clip the hair so it accentuates the positives and maybe decreases what may not be ideal. You want them to be very clean, may more hair off of the top and leave a little bit more hair down on the belly, because you're wanting to accentuate like some depth in it, a deep belly. And then once we get to the show, there's a whole load of products that you need to purchase to get that calf ready for the show. So we travel all over the state. Just 2 weekends ago, we were in Madison for the University of Wisconsin-Madison Badger Kickoff Classic. There are animals from Wisconsin, Michigan, Minnesota, South Dakota, Indiana, Illinois, Iowa, all over coming in. There were over 800 animals there to be judged, both female and so heifers, and then steer.
And the prizes are large amounts of money.
So depending on the show, it could be something as simple as a large banner to indicate that you did win. Otherwise, these jackpot shows, there'll be cash prizes. $500 seems to be one of the going rates. You'll see $200, $250, just depending on where you fall in, whether you were the champion or the reserve champion. At State Fair, if you win your market class or you're chosen the grand champion of the state fair for the junior show, you will sell in the governor's auction. So it's the blue ribbon auction, and companies come and will bid, and they could go $30,000 plus. Then if you go to the large national shows, there's one in Fort Worth. In Denver in January is the National Western, and those you see well over $100,000 companies will pay.
That's really expensive. That's a very expensive steak.
It is. It is.
Any other thoughts about where you think this is going to go for you?
For me, our boys did make it right through 4-H and then on. Our younger son is involved in the industry right now, working for a show cattle farm. It's just a way of life for us. And I think that their years in 4-H and raising animals has just brought them a solid work ethic, a commitment to something bigger than to themselves, leadership skills. It's been amazing. So to be able to continue that on with my nieces and nephews has been amazing. So our boys are older and no longer a part of the 4-H part or the current traveling that we're doing. But right now I have 2 nieces, 3 nephews who show animals, because we show pigs and then the beef.
And I'm sure people are going to be wondering, how did your kids pay for college through this process?
For us, it was difficult even as a a 2-family income, it's hard to put that money away for college. So what we had decided is with each child, we bought the very first animal and paid for all of the feed. And then they would sell their animal at the fair. And so we've been very fortunate. The businesses in Langley County are super supportive of the kids in raising their animals. So they would sell their animal there. That money would go directly into a savings account. They would buy their next animal. We would still pay for all of the feed, and the process would go on. Our son Brad did go to college and didn't have to pay out anything. He was able to use that money. My son Matt, the exact same thing. He's gone through now 3 years of college between the money he saved from raising his animals plus scholarships that he received. And the theme of a lot of the scholarships was, what was your community service involvement? What did you do that was bigger than yourself? And so his involvement in 4-H and raising animals, he was easily able to list the things that he's done. So that involvement in this industry and raising those animals has really helped him reach his goals as well. And my niece she'll graduate in May, and she too has quite the little nest egg from selling her animals, and she'll be studying pre-vet at UW River Falls.
So if any closing thoughts or anything you want to leave people with when they think about where their next cut of beef is coming from?
I think for us, we love the opportunity to let people try out what we're growing, what the kids are growing, because a lot of times most of the animals that we could be selling after the fair are what were raised by the kids. Knowing where your meat comes from and knowing that was lovingly raised, humanely and stress-free, should carry a lot of weight. And I think that the end result and the taste and the flavoring in that animal is huge.
Kathy, thank you so much. Where can people, and again, you have the website 21 Farms.
Yep.
It really is a microfarm because she doesn't have a lot of social media contacts. So how can people get in touch with you if they want to buy some of your very limited quantity of beef?
So they can email me at 21farms@gmail.com or my personal email, k8mbowman@gmail.com.
Great. Kathy, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe and visit the Get Healthy 360 Facebook page. We are always looking for feedback and new story ideas. Thanks again, and see you next time.